move through Europe.
Yep.
Chemical weapons. I don't know why it got separated, or maybe it got separated, but I do want to mention Russia's criminalizing the Duma law,
Okay.
because that's what's going to happen here soon.
Yes. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Pax Americana. Really good to have you here for all our friends in the United States and to all our friends around the world. Welcome to this little piece of anti-authoritarianism live from New York. It is 11 a.m. Eastern here in New York, and we are so happy to have you with us. There is a lot going on, Olga, just a lot. I mean,
Always.
while we were paying attention to well, not just us, while everybody in the media was paying attention to the Epstein files, which I'm all for, by the way. A lot's been happening on the Ukraine front. Interestingly, Vladimir Zelensky gave a interview to Rupert Murdoch's New York Post, the not just the biggest tabloid in New York, but the number 3 newspaper in the United States. I think it's smart and interesting that he gave this to the Post because, of course, that's the newspaper that Donald Trump reads. If he reads any newspapers at all, he is a New York tabloid guy. He's a Post guy. The Post has been in lockstep with him in ways that the Wall Street Journal, Rupert Murdoch's other kind of flagship United States newspaper, has not been.
Except with
Except
you.
on Ukraine.
Yep.
Except on Ukraine. And it's great to see. And so he gave an exclusive to them. I mean, I don't know who's doing his PR and who's advising him, but very, very, very smart. I suspect Ukrainian intelligence probably had something to do with understanding the psychology of Donald Trump and what he's into. But, there are a couple of takeaways from this interview. The first is that Trump and apparently and Zelensky are discussing a quote unquote mega deal on drones because the Ukrainians are saying that our technology, American technology, is lagging their technology. And the reason for that is obvious. They've been fighting on the front lines. We have not been. So for that reason, it sounds to me very much like the Ukrainians are trying to entice Trump into making the United States a more, as Pete Hegseth puts it, lethal fighting force with their help. What do you make of all this?
It's so funny how far we've come, because I remember when the full-scale invasion started. My contacts in Ukraine were like giving me list of things they need: drones, armor vests, pickup trucks,
Right.
and they were like, please, if you know anyone in US who can help. Well, the pickup trucks was for Europe. But the drones and, other light military equipment, they're like, if you know anyone who could help, this is what we need. Over the past 3 years since the full-scale invasion, Ukraine literally is going to be the #1 drone production country. I mean, what they have achieved, and the fact that they now can strike deep, deep, deep inside of Russia, and it took them a little bit over 3 years since the full-scale invasion. Now, interestingly enough, about a month ago, I believe, right after the operation, I believe it was Spiderweb, right after that operation, there was an article in either New York Times or Washington Post saying that, the Pentagon was looking at this attack, and they basically were, jealous to the fact that we don't have these capabilities,
Right.
and that we are really, really lagging when it comes to drone technology, which is the future of warfare. I mean, it's no longer, standing on the front, for the most part, fighting, combat to combat. It's going to be through drones, through AI. And that article came, and interestingly, now you have this where apparently US officials are um, looking for ways to improve their technologies. And I think we even mentioned it on the show, because I remember laughing. I'm like, oh, look, the US wants something from Ukraine. And here we are, that they, are looking at this and trying to figure out how to improve their technologies. And I actually would take this story at face value because of one thing about Trump. I mean, he, is obsessed with the latest technologies and drones. I mean, he's talked about drones so many times that I could see him approaching Zelensky and saying, "You help us with these drones." And improve our capabilities, and we'll send you the things you need.
Well, he's a quid pro quo guy. The question is who put the
Yeah.
idea who in his inner circle put the idea in his head? Was it Lindsey Graham? I mean, I don't think we'll know until some reporter writes a book about this many years hence because they don't report the news anymore. They save it for their news their lucrative book deals.
Interestingly,
Yes.
interestingly, I think one of the New York Post stories you sent me, or somewhere I read that Kellogg and Rubio are filling his ear and
Potentially.
redirecting him. Again, I don't believe anything until I see it because this
Yeah.
sudden shift with Trump. I want to see actions. When we actually see weapons being delivered to the front line and whatnot. But somebody is in his inner circle shifting him.
I wanna actually I wanna talk to you really briefly, and this is maybe not a brief conversation, but I wanna just touch on it quickly and see what you think. So, we talked about this a little bit last week, but I've just been thinking about it, and it makes all the sense in the world. If you recall, let's now shift our attention from Ukraine and Russia to the Middle East. If you recall, Benjamin Netanyahu always had a good relationship with Putin. They understood each other. And after October 7th, if you remember,
Yep.
Hamas beelined straight to the Kremlin.
Hmm.
And one of Netanyahu's cabinet members, I don't remember if it was Smotrich or Ben Gvir or somebody else, but one of the really right wing guys actually went public, which they typically don't do. They don't, the Israelis don't threaten, they just take care of it. And then they'll tell you how they took care of it. But he went public in a rant. And I think it was on social media. I mean, it was really atypical. And was like, "We will never forget what you did to us," blamed the Kremlin for it. "We will remember. You will rue the day that you worked with Hamas." I mean, it almost made it sound like Hamas was you, I think,
His
said
name,
last week.
his name
Hamas
was
was being
Amir,
yeah,
because that's my son's name. His name was Amir, and he
yeah,
actually went on social media and Russian state TV. And,
yeah,
and
and lost it, like, lost it in ways that the Israelis typically don't do. I mean, again, they don't, they don't threaten. And the Israelis are super patient. It took them years, if not decades, to kill the animals who were responsible for the Munich Olympic massacre of their wrestling team. Um, it will take them years, but they will find every last person who was responsible for October 7th and eliminate them. Like they play the long game. And it's now been almost 3 years. But suddenly, ever since Netanyahu and Trump started talking a couple of weeks ago, if not a month ago, about stuff. Netanyahu was here, Trump was, a lot of stuff was happening. Suddenly, that's when Trump's shift on Ukraine happened. I mean, it was almost too coincidental. And there's a part of me that wonders whether Netanyahu somehow helped to fill his ear about Ukraine in ways that he never would have done ever before October 7th. Because if you remember, Ukraine obviously started before October 7th. He was never condemned the Russians. I mean, he was like the last person on earth who ever actually got involved in this. Suddenly, it's become very different. And I have to wonder if the Israelis are somehow responsible for this, in addition to Rubio, who I think fundamentally has always been pro-Ukraine, unfortunately bends the knee to Trump more than he cares about Ukraine. But,
yep.
Privately, whether Kellogg and Rubio, who I don't think are necessarily in great standing with Trump compared to some of the other MAGA influencers, whether Netanyahu had something to do with it.
I have been saying this exact same thing. This actually started during with Iran. And when Trump was deciding whether to bomb Iran, and the Russians were trying to pull him their way, and Putin made two phone calls, not one, two, during that like week and a half time period, including on Trump's birthday, um, to basically try to warn him not to bomb Iran. And then you have Israel who's pulling him to bomb Iran. And that time I noticed, I was like, look at this. He's trapped between two intelligence agencies being pulled and pushed back and forth. And you have the Israelis who won out with Iran. Also, Israel, with everything in January, I believe, sent Patriot missiles to Ukraine for the first time. Mind you, Israel turned their eye for the first 2 years of the full-scale invasion and allowed weapon parts to be shipped to Russia, for their military, weapons. Um, but after October 7th, there was a dramatic shift, especially that Russia rolled out the red carpet for Hamas. Um, I'm sure, if I know, I'm sure Israeli intelligence know that Hamas, the money that went for the October 7th attack was moved through Russia's Garantex platform, crypto platform. And I'm sure if I know, and the Israelis know, that Russia have been supplying Hamas with weapons. And I kept going back to the fact Hamas terrorists did not learn to paraglide in
Yeah.
Gaza. I mean, when I saw the paragliding coming in, I was up that night and I was watching the videos coming in, and I was like, "This is such a Russian tactic because Iran, controls Hamas, but Iran doesn't know how to breach borders. This is Russia's specialty. Wherever they are in the world, they know how to breach borders. And the fact that they used just the paragliding, I mean, we would have seen videos coming out of Gaza if there were random
No,
people
listen. I mean,
paragliding around.
let me
This
let me tell
was
let me tell you something because I think people sometimes misunderstand the proximity of things in that part of the world. Have you ever been to Israel?
no,
Yeah, so I've been there many times, as you know, was just there a couple of months ago, I guess a month ago.
yeah, no.
Um, and it is impossible. I mean, forget intelligence, forget that the Israelis have the best intelligence in the world. Probably only the Brits can compete. We certainly, I don't think, are as good. But even if you're a layperson, it is all so open because it is basically desert. And where the Israelis have planted trees, they've purposely planted trees. Gaza is not a tree lined oasis. That if you're driving, and as I was when we were leaving Israel and trying to get to Egypt to get out of there, if you're driving through the desert and Gaza is on the sea, but it's also, the whole area is effectively desert. You could see what's up in the sky. I mean, a layperson could see what's up in the sky, never mind Israeli intelligence. And so there is no way in hell that I could go paragliding, never mind Hamas, without a billion people seeing me in the sky. I mean, this is not like some remote area of the United States where you can just go and do it and nobody's going to notice, especially because Israeli intelligence eyes have always been on Gaza so much. And and let's not forget also that, of course, Russia needed Iran and Iran funded Hamas. So was that part of the deal for Iran to supply Russia with what they supplied Russia with, which is okay, you help our interests and we'll help yours? I mean, there's no way I think that the Kremlin was not aware of what was going to happen in advance.
What happened on Putin's birthday that day when it
Yeah.
happened? They said, "Oh, look, the only person having a good day today is Putin because it's his birthday." No, and so they were taught in a third-party country because, again, you cannot throw, a paragliding gear and just like make your target. Like you need to practice this. Anyway, so Russia's involvement with there. I
Yeah.
worked very closely with the Syrians since the full-scale invasion. I mean, I could write a book about the atrocities Russia carried out in Syria, working closely with Hamas, with Hezbollah, with the IRGC, and with Iran. Um, Not to mention that Iran was supplying Russia and sent IRGC commanders to Crimea after the full scale invasion to help them set up the drone preparations. We're supplying them with drone. I mean, we literally watched how shipments were going out of Iran with military weapons going through the Syrian port and then making its way either to the Russian port or going up the Caspian Sea. In
Right.
return, Russia also was assisting Ukraine. Iran with their nuclear capabilities. I mean, this is Iran didn't suddenly get nuclear materials from nowhere. They didn't. I mean, when the U.S. bombed Iran, there were 600 Russian scientists and nuclear specialists inside. And Russia had spoken with both Trump and Netanyahu and said, make sure you don't kill our guys. They were planted inside the Bushehr plant. So, yes. So we saw the shift happen in with Iran. And then the key tell, and I think we mentioned last week for me, was that Trump made the announcement of resuming weapons sitting right next to Netanyahu. He was here in the White House, and this is when the sudden announcement and Trump,
Okay.
acting as if he had no clue about this military pause, which is a lie. You know,
Well, he
this
may
is where
he may not. I mean, we're talking about Trump. I mean, says people certainly know, but Trump may not. Trump
I
does not
just
read us.
don't think so. I disagree with this because I don't think something this big that affects our European allies would have taken place without Trump's approval. I mean, this is like a classic Kremlin tactic where there's some kind of an unpopular policy, and Putin washes his hands clean and says, "Oh, this is this guy's fault." Here, if it was something domestic that happened, yes, but here, I mean, you had every European capital blindsided by this shift.
Yeah.
And this affects them directly. And then at the same time, you had, the State Department here and Congress here blindsided. Them, I do believe they were blindsided. But when it comes to transatlantic relations, I mean, Hegseth is, not already on thin ice, despite how Trump praises him. I don't think he would just make a decision, let me stop the weapon shipments are sitting in Poland and not let them cross the border in Ukraine all by
Yeah.
himself without getting, you know, approval from Trump or green light from someone in the National Security Council of Trump. I mean, this is too big of a thing because look, Europe is preparing for war, and we're going to cover in a bit. But Medvedev is threatening to strike Europe. Um,
It's interesting. I don't know if people know it's Dmitry Medvedev, right? I don't know if people really know who he is. So maybe if you watch the show, you do. But if you remember, prior to the Russians changing the constitution, the president could only serve 2 terms. So Putin served his 2 terms. His prime minister was Dmitry Medvedev. Medvedev was, like some rube that Putin trusted. And when Putin couldn't serve a 3rd term, he made himself prime minister so he could basically pull the strings, and he made Medvedev the president. And then Putin ran again because it's only 2 consecutive terms that you can't serve. Medvedev, since then, who, when he was president, acted, presidential, I guess, as presidential as a Russian leader can act, has kind of become, and I think it's not that he's gone off the deep end. I think this is all kind of planned. Has become the guy inside the Russian government. I'm not talking about the people who you watch all the time, who are on TV, who are the Fox News equivalent, who just threaten to nuke New York City on a daily basis. But Medvedev has become the guy that I think Putin puts out there to say really crazy shit. Like, we're going to nuke everybody. Like, if you come for us, we're going to, destroy all of you. And things that I think were Putin to say this, it would be troubling. But Medvedev, don't forget, was the president for a while and is still in government.
He's the
And it's,
chair of the National Security Council.
yeah.
I
And
mean,
so,
it's
yeah,
not it's not exactly a minuscule position. I mean, this is the National Security Council where they,
right,
decide everything. No, 100%. Medvedev is the front guy, and he won't sneeze without Putin's approval. So
right.
every single thing that comes out of him is approved by the Kremlin. And this is what the Kremlin uses to send out warnings. Interestingly enough, Shoigu also came out with a similar warning with this. And he's a former defense minister who got demoted. Now he's part of the National Security Council, but he also came out with a similar warning. So we're at a point where, Europe is preparing. You have every single capital in Europe preparing people, training, the military is getting prepared. You have all the unfortunate neighbors of Russia, who are digging trenches and preparing. Poland is preparing. Estonia is preparing. Like everyone is preparing.
Oh,
Finland is
y
preparing.
you know
Only Orban is not preparing.
well, he yeah, or Orban we'll see which side Orban joins when that war comes.
Yeah.
It's I think also and people who
Yes,
are
Vance
not
will be the Medvedev. When there was that switcheroo being
yeah,
discussed for 2028, that was
yeah,
exactly. I'm like, oh,
um,
Medvedev.
yeah,
This is him.
so people who are, listening to us, and I know there are people who are from Europe who listen all the time. I'd love to hear from you because what I think is fascinating is we here in the United States are kind of very much insulated. We haven't had a war fought on our soil. I'm not counting Pearl Harbor, although I guess we should count Pearl Harbor because that was an actual attack by a foreign government on our soil. We hadn't had that until September 11th, and of course that was a one-time event. But we haven't had a war fought on our soil by a foreign government for a really long time. I mean, certainly not in our lifetime, not in our parents' lifetime, not in our grandparents' lifetime. And what I find interesting is, again, having come from the former Soviet Union, as you know, I did, but also having friends who, my best friend, ironically enough, in high school, her mother was Finnish. And I mean, God, she hated the Russians. And my other friend, ironically, I didn't even grow up in a really multicultural. I don't know why I ended up having these friends because it was a. I grew up in Princeton. It wasn't like the hub of internationalism there, but my other friend, her parents were Lithuanian, and they left during World War II, and they went to Germany and spent the war in Germany, which I always thought was interesting. But they also really hated the Russians, and so much so that my being friends with both of them, I think their parents were like, "How what? Like she's Russian? How can that be?" They were constantly, and including their children, who were as American as more American than I was. I mean, they were born here constantly in the worst mindset with the Russians. Even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, even after even after Yeltsin, they were so programmed to just assume because it had always happened that the Russians were going to invade. The Russian Empire had invaded them, the Soviet Union had invaded them, and they knew that eventually the Russian Federation would invade them too, and that day is coming. What I find interesting, though, is I was in Rome right after the invasion. So over 3 years ago, it was like in late March of 2020. What are we talking about? 2024, right? No, sorry. 20 when did they invade? 2022.
2022 was the first
2022. Sorry, my
invasion.
math, my math. Yeah,
Hmm.
my math is not great. And I was talking to a random Italian woman, and this is Italy, right? Like these people aren't on the border. They're as far away from Russia as you could be in Europe. And she said, "Yeah, I'm going to be going under the assumption that we're going to be at war with Russia." And I said, "Really? You
Hmm.
think?" I mean, the Europeans are so just primed. And I guess it's because World War II and the Cold War is still very much prevalent in their minds in ways that it's not for ours, in our minds. But, you know, the Russians stopped at the Elba because we raced to meet them there after World War II. Had we not raced to meet them, they would have kept going.
Yeah.
And Austria knows that. Germany knows that. And then war borders Germany and Austria. Now you're really getting to Western Europe. Um,
Yeah.
and
No,
they
and
and they know it.
And they are watching it. I mean, look, Ukraine is a European country. They
Yeah.
are watching, the capital being under attack. They watch tanks roll through Ukraine on during the full scale. Let's not even discuss 2014, what happened that everyone turned a blind eye. But at least at a minimum in 2022, it was so visual to see, fighter jets crossing into Ukraine's border, tanks crossing in, columns of tanks crossing in. I mean, they're a hop, skip, and jump away. We have an ocean separating us. And although I'll say that we have been under attack by Russia for the past decade, over decade, as far as information warfare, infiltration, and doing everything to implode this country and democracy. We have, Russia's intercontinental ballistic missile. I mean, I laugh. If they shot it here, it'd end up back in Siberia because, I mean, you know, there's so much corruption there that they've stolen so much from the military and from various contracts. If there's $1 million contract, about 700,000 is going into people's pockets prior to the full scale invasion. So they haven't really maintained anything. And, when they used certain missiles to threaten us, I mean, it's really prototypes. It's like one sitting there, maybe two, you know? So we don't have to worry about this. I mean, we have friendly neighbors, although after Trump, I'm not sure how that'll work out. But we have Canada and Mexico. We don't have to worry about, military invasion from either countries. Europe is right there. They understand. And then on top of it, the Russian rhetoric, it is very clear. Then they've said it, and they've said it prior to the full scale invasion. They are very clear that they want Estonia, that they want Lithuania, that they've even had, I remember a decade ago watching, a news program, like a nightly news talk show program. They had a map showing how they would take the Suwalki corridor and how they would take Lithuania. And this is like their entertainment of like, which
Yeah, I
country am
mean,
I going to
I
take?
mean, look, because I don't even think, Putin said a long time ago, over a decade ago, I think, that the greatest tragedy of the 20th century was the dissolution of the Soviet Union. I don't think his ambition is Soviet. I think his ambition is imperial. And the Russian Empire, for a long time, had control over Poland. I mean, Lithuania wasn't even a thing. It was part of the Russian Empire. It was the Pale of Settlement for a lot of Jews, as a matter of fact. Ukraine, same. Um, I mean, really, all the Baltics, same. Excuse me. And don't forget that St. Petersburg is really Swedish land, and it was taken from the Swedes by Peter the Great. Finland at the time belonged to Sweden, and so Finland is right across the Gulf of Finland from St. Petersburg. In fact, if you ever go to one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to on earth, which is the Summer Palace, Petergof, and right outside of St. Petersburg, you can stand. It's like Versailles. It's pretty much as tacky as Versailles, but that's not what makes it beautiful. What makes it beautiful is it's on the Gulf of Finland, and you can look across, and on a beautiful summer day, you could see Finland. And it is so ripe for the taking if you're an avaricious Russian leader, whether it was Peter the Great or Vladimir Putin. I don't think he fancies himself as a Stalin. I think he fancies himself as a Peter the Great. And that's even more dangerous because that starts to, I think belatedly the Swedes and the Finns realize this, which is why very belatedly they joined NATO, because their whole neutrality thing, which I think they thought they were going to be able to keep the Russians at bay by not siding with NATO, I think they belatedly understood that, in fact, hey, this is not working for us because this guy, we're not talking about 1945. We're talking about 1725 with Catherine the Great, who expanded the Russian Empire more than anybody else. And prior to that, Peter the Great. These are all things to think about.
I think Putin is a combination of all of them. He uses Stalinesque tactics
Mhm.
and he uses Brezhnev tactics and he
Yeah.
has the imperial mindset of the Tsars. No, absolutely. So getting back to the original thing with Trump, I think the shift is from Israel. And I do think that, Europe right now is awake. I mean, Finland is
Yeah.
also fortifying their borders and they understand that now with Trump in office that the US is not a reliable partner. I mean, for the time being, we're selling weapons. I mean, this really could change tomorrow. Tomorrow, Trump can say, you know what, Ukraine, Zelensky's the dictator, and Ukraine, is at fault, and that's it. I don't want nothing to do with this and whatnot. Um, so, we'll see where it goes. When it comes to
Yeah.
this, we'll see where it goes. I'm not putting much into it until I actually see weapons start moving
Um,
into Ukraine.
Agreed, because of course, and Zelensky made that point in the New York Post interview where he said, "Why are you waiting 50 days? The Russians are playing you. Let's get it going." Because I think he fears, as we all do, that Trump is going to taco out, which is what he
Yeah,
does.
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And you have, again, it's a matter to see how this resolved and what happens. For me, the weapons are the most important because the weapons are needed right now. Ukraine is under, an assault every single night, every night. Yesterday, Russia dropped a 500-pound bomb on a shopping center, a civilian shopping center. It's like you going or me going to Home Depot or, the supermarket and having a 500-pound bomb fall on us. So we'll see where what happens with this. I mean, I don't put any stock into Trump. Frankly, US, right now is not reliable by for anyone, frankly. Maybe Israel, but other than that, there it's not a reliable partner. I will say it is very interesting because since Iran and it escalated up to now, that there has been a shift on Russian media, on Russian TV with the propagandists, with the politicians, and Russia has increased their information warfare specifically against Trump. So first it was with Iran, and now it's escalating with Epstein, and you really see what Russia was running against the Democrats over the past decade. Every time during election, you see the same operation unfolding against Trump, and they are doing everything to muddy the water with Epstein to implicate Trump to get, rile people up more. You see a lot of bot and troll activity. And frankly, on Telegram channel, they're now discussing, which I find hilarious, the need, for this list and all this information to come out. So their information warfare against Trump has shifted. Dugan,
Yeah.
who is, a sociopath,
Right.
he actually is still in between. He's, threatening Trump. At the same time, he's like, oh, we need to separate Trump.
Dugan, for people who don't know, is Russia's like idea. I don't know how to describe it. Like ideologue in chief, basically.
Sorry, I
He's
missed talk. I need to um get
yeah.
my thing out. Talk.
I think people need to know who Dugan is. Dugan is like the ideologue for Russia, and Ukraine tried to assassinate him. They failed. They got his daughter instead, but he's a really bad guy and a huge influence on Russian culture. I guess I'm trying to think. He's almost like if you combine Tucker Carlson and Charlie Kirk and all of these other people, Alex Jones, into one. That's who Dugan is in Russia. The one thing I also want to say, Olga, it's not that they're dropping just missiles or bombs on shopping centers. They are blatantly violating the Geneva Convention by using banned chemical weapons. I mean, even Adolf Hitler, and I hesitate to give Hitler credit for anything, but even Hitler did not use chemical weapons during World War II because he had been harmed himself by chemical weapons in World War I, which is why the Geneva Convention went into effect after World War I not to use these kinds of chemical weapons. They were beyond the pale. That is happening in Ukraine now. And in fact, you talked about this, but the foreign policy chief of the EU, Kaja Kallas, excuse me, called it out publicly. and said it's unbearable. That's her quote. That they are not stopping at just conventional warfare, that they're escalating now to using chemical weapons, which cause not just death, but a really brutal kind of painful death. Um, I mean, for all that Putin's been indicted by the International Criminal Court, and people think he's going to go to the Hague. He's never going to go to the Hague. By the way, it's never going to happen. But I mean, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think so. But it's not. That was for kidnapping Ukrainian children. There needs to be a little bit of an amended complaint there, um,
They're
because
working on it. They're
yeah,
working on it. I
yeah.
worked with our former ambassador for war crimes, and they're collecting. U.S. was at the top of it, no longer, but U.S., UK, um, we're working closely with Ukraine's prosecutor, and they have, I mean, there's a lot up the pipeline between mass graves that were found, between the atrocities in Bucha, Izium, Mariupol, the evidence that was collected. I mean, we worked on this for years, and one of the reasons I work closely with the Syrians is because you had a lot of the same people, whether from Russian military or Wagner, who committed the same atrocities in Syria and then they went from Crimea to Syria back to Ukraine. So we wanted to see how we can also make sure that the Syrians face justice because, if you have a military official who is committing war crimes and crimes of aggression in Syria, and then you can combine these charges. But they are working on it. There is so much evidence that they've collected. The U.S. State Department released a report either in 23 or the beginning of 24 of Russia's use of chemical weapons. It barely got a blip in the United States. I mean, I remember when chemical weapons was like the biggest thing, that worst thing that could ever happen. And here you had the State Department release a very detailed report of every single incident that they confirmed Russia used chemical weapons. And barely any news here. Whereas now the Carlos is saying that there are 9,000, over 9,000 incidents that the Russians use chemical weapons. And I mean, this pretty much tracks because during that report, it was around 5,000, 5,500, and we saw videos of it. I mean, it's all documented. Russian telegram channels were putting out these attacks showing the chemical weapons being used. So, it's horrible because I'm, old enough to remember when we went to Iraq, over weapons of mass destruction and how important the use of chemical weapons, preventing the use of chemical weapons was. I'm old enough to remember when Assad was using chemical weapons with Russia's help, with Iran's help. And now you have this happening on a wholesale level in Ukraine, and it's like barely any.
Yeah, speaking of State Department reports, at the same time, it's kind of whiplash, and it makes me wonder if Trump is saying all of this to get the Senate off his back, and he really has no intention of following up. I don't know. I'm going to hope for the best, but at the same time, as Marco Rubio is potentially whispering in his ear about cutting this deal with Ukraine and so on and so forth, the State Department just laid off over 1,300 staffers, including a huge number of Ukraine and Russia analysts.
Yeah,
And, this is not people who sit around crocheting all day long. These are the people who document exactly what you're talking about. They're the people on the ground who are diplomats, who are working to ameliorate the situation, people who are dealing with our allies in the West on these issues, people who are dealing with our adversaries in the East on these issues. And now they're gone, laid off.
Yep. And they also shut down the war crimes unit that was tracking Russia's genocide, war crimes, and crimes of aggression. So they laid off the people who are working on this unit. And then on top of it, I mean, look, Trump has disarmed America completely. You think Russia's attacks against America are stopping? Absolutely not. We have the cyber security task force and pretty much all the cybersecurity units within agencies dismantled. Disinformation, countering disinformation units dismantled. I mean, literally, he had disarmed America. Um, I mean, frankly, I don't understand how Congress is not, and including in Senate, they're a drop more serious there. How they're not raising the alarm that he is leaving us prime open for an attack. Now, we have to remember Russia works arm in arm with China, with Iran. So they can easily, take out our how you call it, electric grids. They can carry out jointly a set of attacks that will put America like forget it. I mean, we will be in disaster, and we know from all the reports over the past decade, the Iranians were fiddling around in our nuclear plants. The Russians were fiddling around in all critical infrastructure. I mean, for goodness sakes, Russia and I believe the first time Trump was in office, they hacked into the
Or
water supply
yeah,
plant in Florida.
yeah.
They took down the Colonial Pipeline, disrupting gasoline across the East Coast and causing the prices to go up. The fact that he has disarmed us, and the fact that he, purged these experts who sit, and this is their job, to analyze, to read the Russian news, to monitor the Telegram channels. So it's not only for Ukraine, it's for America. Their job is to collect information, analyze this information, and see if there's a threat to the interior of the United States. And if there is, pass it over, where they work hand in hand with FBI, and that's it. And the fact that literally every agency you look at, Russia had, the Russian stuff has been dismantled. Russia right now can literally move $1 billion to pay for a biological attack on U.S. using our Western banks because guess what? They dismantled the units that were, tracking any kind of sanctions evasion schemes that Russia is using. They could do it directly now.
And I think it's also interesting, and I had this conversation with a former member of Congress who's very involved in these issues, and he raised a good point. You have legislation in the Senate, which I broadly support, but would put, I think, like, what is it, 500% sanctions in any country doing business with Russia? Trump has threatened 100% sanctions above and beyond what he's already placed in anybody doing business with Russia after 50 days. So let's stop for a second. That would be China and that would be India. And I don't know about India, but China's not going to cave. China's not going to suddenly stop doing business with Russia because Donald Trump is threatening sanctions, which they know full well. The minute the market starts to tank, he's going to withdraw anyway. So that sanctions package to me on third parties doing business with Russia is really stupid and foolish because at best, we'll be the ones paying for it, we being the American consumer. At worst, it's tariffs that he agreed, right? At worst, Trump's going to just taco out again, as soon as the market tanks, which it would if all of a sudden we had whatever we have in China now, plus another 100% on top of that in tariffs. So, to me, what a good package for Ukraine looks like is just give them the weapons they need.
Weapons,
That's
and
all.
look, the sanctions work. I
On,
can tell
on
you,
Russia.
yeah, no, but they work. Because, but not the way the Senate is proposing blanket
It's tariffs. Yeah.
500%.
And he's proposing
Um,
tariffs. He's not proposing
yeah,
sanctions. He's proposing tariffs.
but secondary sanctions work. And we've been doing this since the full-scale invasion. We did go after Chinese banks and slap secondary sanctions for doing business with Russian
Right.
entities and Russian, and assisting Russia. We did go after, Indian businessmen and Indian companies and Indian banks that were. It has to be done in a targeted way because if you do
Right.
slap, 500% on India as a whole, yes, this is going to reel the markets and upend the global markets. But if you do it in a strategic, and this is exactly what the FBI and the Commerce Department and Treasury OFAC were working on. They were looking at these third routes through China, through Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, um, India, Dubai, and they were doing strategic secondary sanctions. Now, this works because if you're a Chinese bank, and now not as a country as a whole, but if you're a Chinese bank and you get cut off from the Western markets because you got put onto the
Yeah.
secondary sanctions list, you're going to think twice, should I continue doing this
But
or
again,
allow it?
Olga,
Mm-hmm.
targeted an individual. What Trump is proposing is tariffs.
He's, yeah,
And
it's hard.
and it's absurd. And rather than doing that, sanctions are great. Again, targeted individual sanctions. But what the Ukrainians really need is weapons.
Weapons,
And
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 that's why
and
I say
and
when we see
Rush those
weapons
weapons.
there,
Yeah.
mhm,
And I want to get to one more thing before we go because it's something very important, not just to what's happening in Russia, but actually a precursor to what I think is going to be happening in the United States soon. And you and I talked
mhm,
about that before we went on air, which is that Russia is moving to criminalize the reading of independent media. And they're rushing through an amendment in the Duma, the Russian parliament, that punishes citizens for searching for or accessing what they call, and you wrote about this, obviously extremist materials.
mhm,
What is obviously extremist materials, Olga? It's
anything.
probably your Substack and mine.
Mhm.
Um, anything. I mean,
Anything.
it's if it's not clarified, it could be anything that anybody deems. It could be, I don't know, if they don't like some children's book you're reading, that could be extremist. I mean, it's very Soviet, right? Like it's whatever the leader decided that day was not socialist realism art. The artist or the painter or the musician would be taken out and shot that same day. They're like, what did I do? Because Stalin listened to a piece of music and said, this doesn't comport with socialist realism and whatever that means that day. And I mean, that's really what happened in the 30s. I mean, if you want to know about the purge in the 30s and 40s and even 50s before Stalin died of Russian artists of all stripes, whether, painters or musicians or authors or anybody else,
Yep,
that's what happened.
poets.
Poets, it is, I mean, brilliant. I mean, literally, like people who were hailed as national treasures one day in the Kremlin with Stalin one day, the next day they were taken out and shot because he just happened to not like what they wrote, even though nothing they wrote was not, I mean, they weren't being subversive at all, a lot of them. Anyway, that's happening there now. And, you know, we have a First Amendment in this country that's been chipped away at over and over and over again by the courts. And when I say the courts, I don't mean the lower courts. I mean, it's been kicked up to the Supreme Court, which just goes along. And these unsigned opinions where they don't give you a reason, they just have a 6-3 opinion, unsigned, and that's that. And I don't want people in the United States to think about Russia and say, oh, those poor Russians. I can't believe what they're in for. When we're on the cusp of being in for the same thing here. Very much. I mean, you have people at customs now going through the phones of arrivals to see if there's anything critical of Trump. You had a substacker from Australia who was denied entry into the United States and put back on a flight to Australia when he landed, I believe, in Los Angeles because of something he wrote that was negative about Trump. It starts with foreigners. It will move on to green card holders. It will then move on to nationalized citizens like Olga and me, and then eventually it will come for everybody else. It's only been 6 months. And I think that is very, 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 very important for people to know.
I'll
Because
just add
yeah.
I'll just add, so there's Duma, I mean, for them extremist is LGBTQ plus. For them extremist is reading the New York Times, CNN, BBC, or frankly, any news outlet that's not state media. They are doing this, and again, the Trump has modeled what he's doing here very much after what is happening in Russia. And like I said months ago, that I believe that this unauthorized Doge was to go in and to steal all the data, fuse it together, and create a centralized surveillance system. Well, when I said it back then, I sounded wacky. And ever since, all the data points point to that. Because now not only are they fusing federal data, they're demanding voter rolls from states, DMV records,
I want
SNAP,
yeah,
Medicaid.
can I interrupt you for a second? Because you just touched on something really important. I want to touch on it a little bit more broadly before we go. And I think I did not read your attorney tracker yet today because I've been swamped. But I don't know if you hit on this, but I think it's important for people to know. The Washington Post yesterday came out with an exclusive, and it got no attention, zero. And I want to bring attention to it because it is so crucial for people to know this. It is, if I had Soros money, I would literally do a national TV buy and blast this out in a 30-second spot to every single American so they know what's happening. The DOJ this is the headline from the Washington Post. DOJ hits states with broad requests for voter rolls and election
Yep.
data. And I want to just read the lead from the story because it will tell you what you need to know. The Trump administration and its allies, which means that they're not people in government, have launched a multi-pronged effort to gather data on voters and inspect voting equipment, sparking concern among local and state election officials about federal interference ahead of the 2026 midterm.
Yep.
They, where we have consistently said that our elections are secure is because they're administered by the states and actually by the counties. When you go vote, you vote in your county for the most part. And that's, you have the county clerks who administer, boards of elections who administer this, and they're local and they're not necessarily beholden to Washington, either in the Democratic or Republican side. That is all about to change. Because if they federalize elections, and they're not going to just do that, they're going to start with saying we need a national voter ID law, which is going to disenfranchise a lot of people who
He
don't
signed an
necessarily.
executive order in March
Yeah, and we'll
exactly
see what,
on that.
and I'm sure the courts will, I'm sure the
Mhm.
Supreme Court will go along with it. Um, he is going to create all sorts of barriers to voting, almost like a poll tax in some ways, because you have to understand IDs are expensive. And if you're an elderly, poor person of color, you might not have the money to, or you don't know where your birth certificate is. You certainly don't have the money to go and get a passport. Those are really expensive. You may not be a driver. You may not have a driver's license. Not everybody does, especially people who live in cities, which is exactly who they're trying to target. And I can't tell you how many people I know who live in New York who do not have a driver's license. They have an ID that I believe the DMV gets them, but that's because they could afford it. I'm sure there are people in New York City who don't have that, or whatever this administration is going to say is enough. They may say a driver's license is not enough. They may want federal records like a passport, or they may want a birth certificate, which I don't have, Olga, and I don't know if you have. Mine is somewhere in the Soviet Union, and that country doesn't exist anymore. So, these are all things that they're doing to try to disenfranchise. And on top of that, I also don't want people to sleep on the connection here. I actually have a Substack column on this tomorrow that I'm working on today. But what I think is also important to know is how this is all tied into the defunding of NPR and PBS. Because for a lot of rural and other places, NPR is a lifeline. It is a lifeline. It gives you unbiased, which I know they think is the definite they think everything's biased, that's not MAGA propaganda, right? But in
Mhm.
reality, NPR, you know, Sesame Street is not biased. It tells people how to treat each other kindly. Um, Firing in line with Margaret Hoover, who's a former Republican, is certainly not biased, or she may be still a Republican. But I mean, this is a person who's been a Republican strategist for a long time and a pundit for a long time, not Democratic propaganda. And I can go on. Where I think this is critical is they're trying to cut off access to all information in news deserts. That is not information that they then can pay to pipe into people's laptops and people's computers through targeted ad buys. And I know this because I do this for a living. If I wanted to target you, I know exactly how to do it. And it's not expensive. And I can get any article that I want, any Facebook algorithm manipulated to get on your laptop. And that's what you're going to consider to be news. And what I think is so important is these two things together are how they sway an election that otherwise is not looking to be a good outcome for them next year.
Yep.
They're connected. They're
Yeah, and
connected.
then on top of it, with the Russian stuff, I mean, criminalizing, reading uh, websites or obtaining information that the Kremlin deems is not, not something you should concern yourself with. I mean, Trump is going to do this here, and we're watching Doge fusing all the data together. We're watching Palantir, sorting this data and putting it together through AI. Right now, we're immigrants, as I keep saying, are the test case for all of this to see how far they can push. But at the same time, they're using immigrants as a test case to use the Medicaid information, state information, not Medicaid, but state information, like whatever IRS information when undocumented immigrants pay taxes, and putting all this data together. On top of it, they've also been using third-party surveillance systems. Clearview AI is one of them, facial recognition. Another, I forgot the name of it. I'll put it in to our show notes. But it's a driver's license reader. So ICE has been working with these companies. Again, they're using it specifically for immigrants. It's going to expand to everyone. And then the third thing is that they are using another third party company. And all of this is being, by the way, done unlawfully. They're using another third party company to sweep and scan all social media, everything from Blue Sky to Twitter to TikTok to Facebook. So, I mean, they're really creating the centralized surveillance system in the US. And this is only a matter of time. That's why this is important to watch what the Kremlin does, because what it took Putin 20 plus years to do, Trump is doing this because he has the playbook and he has the tactics and techniques needed. He is doing this, like speeding it through here. And I mean, within a year, I'm sure we'll be talking about the, that people aren't allowed to access what's unfavorable websites on the internet. So
I,
this
I,
is something to keep in mind only because, Russia. And just to finish up, interestingly enough, there is something happening inside Russia, because not only are they now cracking down on this with this new law moving through the Duma, but at the same time, they've been nationalizing a lot of companies over the past year and a half. Interestingly enough, the owners of these companies are being murdered. So not only are they stealing private companies, they're killing the people. We just had it recently. There were a string of cases, and they've also ramped up their arrest again. I mean, post the full scale invasion in 2022, I actually have a file tracking every single death going back to the 1990s to St. Petersburg. But after there was the big peak and it calmed down, for maybe the past, I would say, last year calmed down, and now you see this new peak of arrest of defense officials, business people, and deaths. I mean, one literally, uh, long story short, Putin signed a decree dismissing him. Hours later, they reported he was found dead and committed suicide in the car. I mean, they're being so brazen about it right now, and if you look at the patterns, it really is tying back to companies that they are seizing.
Um, okay, couple of things. Nicole, I saw your text about your oncologist and losing Medicaid. I want to tell your story. I'm looking for people who are at risk of losing either their health care or their food assistance or anything else. I'm literally paying for it out of pocket, but I'm recording people's stories and then cutting them into ads to basically put on Instagram and TikTok and anywhere else where normal people can see them. If you are amenable, I want to tell your story. If anybody else has a story like that to tell, please contact me through Substack or Twitter or any way you want. Um, and we will set something up because I do want people, we need to put real faces to the horror of the big, bad, beautiful bill. And unfortunately, our leaders in Washington are not doing it. So I'm going to have to. So please contact me. That's one. Two, yes, Olga and I are going to do a call with people soon. Thank you for that message. We have to just find a date. We're both pretty busy. I'm traveling, unfortunately, the last week in July for work, but we were going to set something up very soon for our paid subscribers. So thank you for reminding us of that. We're very remiss in, in doing that. And third, for the people who ask how Olga and I sleep at night when we know all this stuff, we don't. So, which is why we always look so tired on Thursday mornings. Anyway,
Well,
everybody,
sleep
yeah,
is for the dead.
yeah,
That's what I
sleep is for the
have.
weak. To everybody who joined us this week, both here in the United States, and we're so especially pleased that we have people all over the world, from as far as Australia, who join us every week, in the UK and I think Norway and other places. Thank you. We're really deeply touched that you do. And we will be back here again next week for another episode of Pax Americana at 11 a.m. Eastern. Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Bye, everyone. Bye.